Hello, and I'm Sean Millerick, and welcome to Marlins After Dark, because no team keeps you up late at night like the Miami Marlins. I will have to talk about a rough start to the homestand, and we'll also dive into what's going on with Sandy Alcantara, the possible trade talk, because this is just a bump in the road. The Marlins are still a winning team in May, heading into June, and that's exciting. Talk a little Marlins top 30 later on, and we're joined tonight by real Ely Sussman of FishOnFirst. There now, and we'll talk about that transition and what's going on there. Eli, thoughts? How you doing? And because first off, thoughts on tonight's 9-4 shellacking at the hands of the Padres.
I'm doing very well, Sean. Thank you for having me on again. An interesting game that in some ways is just familiar. For whatever reason, although Skip Schumacher has pressed so many of the right buttons this year, he has fumbled repeatedly the handoff between Sandy and the bullpen. He's done it both ways. We've seen the times where he keeps Sandy in way too long. We've seen times where he's pulled a little too early. We've times like tonight where I thought it was actually pulled at exactly the right time, like give him a shot in the seventh inning, given how efficient he had been. But after a couple walks, go to the pen, and I think in this case it was Tanner Scott that they bring in to face Juan Soto. Like, this is a game where I don't. It is frustrating with Sandy. I thought early in this game his command looked really good. I had a tweet in my drafts around the fourth inning about, wow, Sandy's command looks awesome tonight. He had a plan, it seemed, to throw to his arm side, inside to righties and away to lefties. And it seemed like he was repeatedly hitting that spot with his sinker early on the first time through the lineup. It's not so much the second and third time through. And he ends up with 5 walks, which is, it's really hard to have a really good start that way. But ultimately, this was kind of a Juan Soto game. Juan Soto was the one that I think had that game-tying hit in the 7th, and then he was the one in the 9th inning. They get the leadoff runner on, and it's Soto against Dylan Floro, and there's like nothing you can do to you have to put him on, because he's so good as a situational hitter. He is back to being peak Juan Soto. This is the best version of him that we've seen in a couple years. Even though the recent version, even the bad version of Juan Soto is a dangerous hitter, but he was in the middle of this game, and ultimately Dylan Floro and the defense. Dylan Floro and some bad defense behind both him and Sandy. I think this is one of the few games all year where they've had 3 errors, and I think at least one other play that wasn't an error. I think Jorge Soler, didn't he have that bad play that wasn't scored an error that he played in? Yeah, where allowing runner to score all the way from first base on the ball that he probably should have cut off before it even hit the ball. It was just a really bad defensive game as well. Yet offensively, still a decent number. I've been pleasantly surprised the past few weeks before Sanchez came back today, and still with Jazz out, that offensively they are hitting at the same level they were before those injuries, if not even a little bit better. That's been reassuring that they are not quite as bad as they were on that side of the ball during the first month or so of the year. This is to me, if you saw Fish on First live tonight, I predicted that the Padres would win the series, and I still feel that way. I think they're underperforming a little bit, and the Marlins are overperforming a little bit. And this is a series where, I think this is the toughest team they'll play in a while. So that's the silver lining, is that once they get through these next few days, this is a nice sweet spot of the schedule for the Marlins to potentially really build themselves up to give them some breathing room later in the year.
Yeah, soft landing following this series for sure. You get the Royals, get the A's, get the White Sox. So like that opportunity, but going into this, if you were told as that you'd get 4 earned runs at a Sandy start, there you take that going to the bank between that and how the bullpens looked, for the most part the last couple of weeks, but just all came apart late for the Marlins tonight. And it's that third time through the order. It's that one linchpin inning for Sandy, and just I understand why they sent him back out. There was with that pitch count and how efficient he'd been, but part of me was just thinking, and I think I did tweet this out of just. Well, actually, I think I tweeted out to send him back out if they scored in the bottom of the inning, and they did. They gave him an extra lead, but still, just I would have loved to maybe have seen him not sent, and just 2 quality starts in a row, and just let that be on the ledger and let the chips fall. But just didn't. I'm not sure that would have mattered tonight the way it played out. Do you think? I guess since we covered Sandy so much, we could talk about this now quickly. Do you think anything is like really off with Sandy? Are we at the point? Is there enough of a sample size that this is the point where we should be concerned, or is it still? It's just that one rough inning that for the most part he is fine. That you hear the broadcasters talk about that dig
Yeah.
into half the numbers and it's still good. But what are your thoughts on him overall and going forward?
It's really tough to put your finger on. I do feel he is better than his results have been, that the defense behind him has been particularly bad this year. But some games, it's him. Sometimes it's with his control not being quite where it should be. And this one just being from inning to inning, the way that it changed from the first portion of his start to the second portion, that was really weird. And that's something that honestly we haven't seen a ton. More often, it's been that he's just been more hittable as the game goes on. And that really wasn't a big factor in this one. He allowed 5 hits and only that one extra base hit that maybe with a better defensive right fielder is just a single as well. So it's really not a common thread. He's missing bats about the same state level that he was last year, but he's not really having many of those individual games where he has a ton of swing and miss. I think that is what sticks out, is that even when he's seemingly at the top of his game and his stuff is as sharp as it could be, I don't think he's really had a single game all year where he's really piling up the whiffs. He hasn't had double-digit strikeouts in a single game all year. This is now being his 11th game, a full third of the year. So that's kind of what sticks out on a variety of levels, where even when he is completely locked in, it's not quite the same as last year. And yeah, just generally speaking, I still think he's going to be better moving forward than he has been to this point. But what I tried to emphasize entering the year is that he was never going to replicate exactly what he did in 2022. Like, that's not where the standard should be set. That everything had to go right for him last year to put up the kind of numbers he did. So that was unrealistic. But I think the fair concern is that, what's different about him compared to 2021? Like 2021, you'd think that would be a sort of reasonable baseline for him moving forward. And he is falling below that baseline in a variety of ways. He is more hittable, and the control is a little bit worse overall. It's just, not quite locked in, not all things considered. But this trend where I think the most clear pattern is that the third time through the lineup or the 6th and 7th inning, as he gets deeper into the game, he is just getting worse. Sometimes it manifests in different ways. Across the board, it's almost always worse than it is early on. And that is not all that different from what you typically expect for a pitcher. It is completely different from what we saw last year, because last year is when there was no drop off whatsoever once he got deeper into the game. And this year there clearly is. So we've now seen enough of a sample of this where I go back to Skip Schumacher. He has to manage in a certain way. He has to manage the pitcher, the player that he has right now, not the player that he thought he was getting or the player that was there last year. It's a different player. I think that's kind of the bottom line, even if you can't put your finger on why. And maybe you trust that as the season goes on, he gets back in sync. To this point in the season, he has been a different player than he was in 2022. And you actually have to acknowledge that. So I'd like to see them do that. And for a near-term future, I mean, you mentioned it. It would have been meant a lot if you took him out after 6 innings tonight, essentially stacking back-to-back quality starts on top of each other, coming off his previous game, and that would have been something to build on. And that's not what happened. So it's frustrating, and I can understand exactly why they're reluctant to do it. It's a rotation where most of these other pitchers, even when they're on, they don't go super deep into the game. So much of Sandy's value is eating those innings, and now you can't honestly trust him to eat those innings deep into those games, which puts him in a very, very difficult spot. I have sympathy for the situation because Sandy is frustrated and the team is holding him to a high standard and he holds himself to a high standard. I'll just reiterate, it's just not the same overall player that he was last year. And the main way you notice that is when it gets super deep into those games. You really should not be pushing him as far as he has been pushed because he's just not succeeding in those situations.
No, I agree. And so you raised an interesting point with the treatment of the other pitchers. I mean, if we think of, if it was Luzardo in that situation, if it was Cabrera, it's hard to imagine them getting the seventh. Honestly, in that instance, I mean, certainly, Sandy's quote all of last year was him being able to throw 150 pitches. I mean, it is it's a different year pitcher type, different level of stamina, but still, I mean, just like with every other pitcher, it has been, that quick hook, that quick move to the bullpen, that more of this seemingly masterful management of the relief corps that we've been praising all year because we haven't seen that in past seasons. So it would be interesting to see how many more of these appearances Sandy gets before, and if any, before Skip does make that change, because he does seem like the kind of manager who will make that switch at some point going forward. But moving on, so some big changes, big weekend in Marlins baseball, and I'm not even talking about the sweep of the Angels. I'm talking about, of course, the rebranding or reformation of a new Marlins fan site. So you are now the head of FishOnFirst, formerly with, there it is, folks, formerly with a site that will not be named, but you can name it if you want. So tell us what's going on there, why the switch to FishOnFirst, and then make sure we know how we can find you. What can people do to find you and follow the new site?
Yeah, the short answer is it's all the same stuff that people were used to at Fish Stripes. I took myself. I was obviously the site manager over there for a little over 5 full years in charge, and then a couple before that contributing in other ways over there covering the team. And I took everybody with me to this new site. We felt we had just outgrown the model that they had at SB Nation for us to continue doing what we're doing and like explore new avenues for us to just continue branching out and continue doing a more thorough job than we've ever done before. It just made more sense to operate on our own, operate independently. Who do we think of when we do this? We think of first the audience. Are we going to be able to serve the audience at a different site and do all the things that we're accustomed to doing, from covering individual games, analyzing players, doing the historical retrospectives, the columns, the podcasts, the live streams, the video editing? Can we do all that stuff without being affiliated with SB Nation? And the answer was pretty clearly yes, we could do that. Could we do it and still have, could we still have the support of the Marlins themselves, the cooperation to cover them so thoroughly and do it that way, and cooperation from other MLB teams as well when necessary? And the answer to that was yes, when I did my due diligence on that. And so then the question was, does everybody who was with me over there, that some of them admittedly were, they saw SB Nation itself with a certain level of prestige or reputation, whatever you want to put it, that there was some sort of allure there that brought them there in the first place. Would they be cool with leaving and not being associated with them anymore, like doing the same stuff and with a different brand that has nothing to do with them? And the answer was 100% yes, with everybody that it was over there is now coming over here to do the stuff there. Yeah, where everybody's, our values, I'd say more so it was SB Nation's values changing, where it just wasn't clear what they were trying to accomplish with their network. And there was just so few benefits at this point that you could really point to on any level that we were getting there that would make sense, that really were keeping us there. What exactly was still keeping us there other than just continuity and being a certain level of comfort with just continue doing what we're doing? And I just ran out of ways. I ran out of reasons like to keep us there. Ideally, we would have done this either before season or after the season. That's the easiest way to keep the audience on the same page. This is abrupt in the middle of the year where almost every single day there's something to do with our coverage. And all of a sudden, if that coverage goes from one place to a completely different place, it could be confusing. So that's the downside of doing it now. But I
Yeah.
did feel, yeah, with everybody's best interest, it'd be better to do it now than to wait until after the year, another 4.5 months or so. Yeah, this just felt like the time in order to be able to salvage this season and still by the end of this year feel really good about where we will be. And at the same time, yeah, just setting a foundation where we feel we can continue growing. Because yeah, just being able to be accountable for ourselves, and there's just a lot of levels of customization that we could bring to our coverage that just weren't possible under the pretty rigid constructs of the network we were previously part of.
All right. And are you still, I know, are you still doing that super subscriber thing? Are there ways that people can support you directly if they're so interested or inclined?
Yes, yes. So that's what we started up almost a year ago in the middle of last season. The super subscriber model was through Twitter. And then a few months ago, we found a way to do it on YouTube as well for people that weren't on Twitter. I think what we're doing now is really simplifying the registration by doing it directly on our site on FishOnFirst.com. There's a pinned post on the homepage near the top where people can see the entire description about what a super subscriber is and the perks involved with that. It is getting almost all of our content is available for free. I think we create more free Marlins content than anybody else, but we also want to. And I just got an alert from a new super subscriber, Sean Millerick. For people, I'm vaguely familiar with that name, but thank you, Sean,
Seems like a good guy.
for coming over. So because yeah, this new setup, it gives me those instant notifications about when things go through. And so far, just about everybody has been able to submit their order very smoothly. We found that this e-commerce system directly on our site goes smoother than the Twitter site as well. But what it will be is it allows people to access certain perks through Twitter, like as participating in the prediction time segment that we do before every single live stream, for super subscriber exclusive giveaways where we just choose among the pool of super subscribers who to give away game tickets or Marlins gear or subscriptions to other premium services that our partners offer. And we just choose among a limited pool of those that support us directly as super subscribers. We have the gift database, which I've built up over a handful of years. That's one thing that's coming with me during the transition is all the many hundreds of gifts of current and former Marlins players and non-players and Billy the Marlin for people to save and use for themselves. The daily game notes. There's some people love those, others not so much, but it's just a extremely thorough summary of all the players on the active roster, as well as details about the particular game and series coming up that they disseminate to media usually and not to the public, but we keep those as another super subscriber perk. We're always coming up with other little things that are relatively simple for me to do. And yet I think in the aggregate, these are things that are really valuable and they more than justify the subscription price, which is just starts at $3 a month.
Wait, can you say that again? I'm sorry.
$3 a month for all
it's
of it.
Only $3 a month.
Yes.
That is insane.
Yes, you can customize it and make it even more for people that are especially appreciative. But we keep it. It's the same low point of entry that we had before, and we are working very hard to make it a good value for people.
Well, awesome, and yeah, kind of kidding aside, definitely it's I can personally attest it's a huge value, but to the free content you spoke of as well, it's definitely some of the finest Marlins coverage out there. So SB Nation's lost, and glad you're pushing on. People should definitely follow Fish on First if you're somehow listening to this and are not. Imagine that's a very small sample size of Marlin fan. Go ahead and follow these guys. They do great work. But,
thank you.
Sure.
Yeah. Thankfully, we were able to transition the audiences on YouTube and on Instagram and on TikTok, but on Twitter is the one where it's create a separate account. So you do have to follow the new accounts at Fish on First if you aren't already. But we thank the few thousand people that have already done so.
Yes, thanks to them. All right. Moving on, the to acknowledge, I guess, the other big, sports story in town. Did be remiss we didn't give some love to the Miami Heat and their beating down of the Boston Celtics on Sunday night, and the fact that really just seems to be the time to kick on the city of Boston between the Florida Panthers and the um, Miami Heat. All the other organizations, doing well in South Florida right now. And I know for me, at least personally, something that's driven my Heat fandom over the last 27 years or so has been their just dazzling competence. Their consistent competence, being that team that can be relied upon, year in and year out to compete to some level. That they're going to do a little better than the sum of their parts. I think I mixed that around, but that they're going to be better than you expect. Do you think that the Marlins now, with Skip Schumacher at the helm, with Kim Ng, so we're seeing some of her moves bear fruit. The Raya's acquisition, the Soler contract's really looking good in year two. There, do you think that this team is moving forward in a good direction where that can be the expectation? That you think we'll see this, hovering around 500, this within the financial constraints they have, and that is, the caveat with baseball compared to these other salary cap leagues. Do you feel good about the direction? Are the Marlins here for real in the sense that they have more franchise stability than they did a few years ago, or do you still think there's a lot to prove there? Are you waiting for the other shoe to drop because it has every other year for the last 20 years? Where's your head out on the direction of the franchise?
Yeah, well, at least they've tried doing some different stuff. This particular season, for example, building half the roster out of second baseman and also assembling a whole lot of contact first hitters, understand, like trying to foresee exactly how rule changes would impact things and prioritizing guys that could put the bat on the ball. I mean, they tried to form that. They had that in mind when building this roster. There was done with a purpose, understanding where their resources were going. There was a plan in place to potentially leverage that. Um, but the short answer is I don't think there's the same level of magic, the same level of. I don't have the same trust in them as I do in the Heat. They haven't earned that yet, and
Oh, no.
it's at this point in the season, I'm still not wholly convinced. You'd have to say that Skip's tenure as manager is off to a good start. That um, like I guess you could point to something. Things are going pretty well for them, all things considered. But I think any way you slice it, this team is overachieving. I don't feel like they're necessarily complimenting themselves in any way that's like lifting, that's like contributing to this extra success. I think it's more about luck than it is about anything in particular that's really clicking well. They're certainly a better team than they've been in a number of years over a full length season. There's been that incremental improvement, but it's going to take more. And it's going to take more either in the form of, I mean, the weirdest surprise has been the starting pitching as a whole, just being so unremarkable from Sandy and really all the way down, not having that was supposed to be the strength of this team. And yet it's been very middling at best, all things considered. That was what we pointed to with this organization as a whole as the thing that was their biggest advantage, is being able to develop these young guys one after another to be competent starters, in some cases to take them from other organizations and somehow make them significantly better than they were. And this season hasn't been like the best testament to that. So because most of all, you need to keep these guys healthy. And that's something that they haven't cracked yet in any special way, is figuring out how to keep these arms healthy, more so than other teams. And that's been a struggle across the league. It's hitting the Marlins about as much as it hits the typical MLB team. So I'm not getting overly excited. I think we ran a poll earlier today. I'll see the results. They're not final yet, about how many Marlins fans root for the Heat and also the Panthers in that conversation, now that they're on the verge of contending for a championship as well. We looked at what the crossover is between Marlins fans and fans of those teams, and there's significant crossover. So I would just say that those fans are the ones that do open up their hearts to multiple South Florida teams, that they should keep doing so, because I don't think you want to put all of your hopes in the Marlins moving forward. They're still in this, very strange state. They're kind of in the middle of the pack, and that's better than they were, but it is still a long way from building a really sustainable and championship contending organization.
Say was one last question with that gut feel on opening day 2025. Are Kim and Skip still running the show?
Wow. I would say the chances of Skip still being manager are high there. I would say yes. Yeah. If I had to pick, I would say both of them are still in their positions by then.
Okay. I think I'm still optimistic. We'll see if they lose tomorrow. Such as the fleeting passions of the of the Marlins fan. But yeah, I would agree that they'll still be. Got a good feeling. There's something about them this year. That's the phrase that keeps being bandied about on Twitter. But in terms of needing to get something else, I think the Herald dropped a story within the last week that the Marlins are actively pursuing help at positions that we've all been screaming about on social media. Them needing help at, and honestly, the Marlins are kind enough to go out and profoundly demonstrate that they might need some help at shortstop and catcher in tonight's game with some of the errors that came up today. So I did kind of want to check in on your thought on some of those trade targets. And I guess if you have catcher and shortstop being the positions, a lot of the talk is focused on catcher with Jacob Stallings, profound struggles at the plate for most of the season, and Nick Fortes not being demonstrably better, behind him, and certainly having regressed from the previous season. But so I guess just what are some of the names that you're most interested in? I mean, I feel like at catcher, it's such a small pool in general of catchers that'd be worth adding offensively. But I almost feel like I've heard more catcher names than shortstop names, which should be theoretically deeper. But if you read anyone's shortstop's opinion, it seems to kind of start and end with when the White Sox are going to let Tim Anderson go. And I haven't really seen much other discussion about the shortstop position.
Right. Well, with the shortstop position, I'll start there. I mean, the move they made this offseason to get Jacob Amaya, I feel like before rushing into acquiring in doing what it takes to acquire an established starter at that position, I think they would give Amaya a shot. He's playing extremely well at AAA, especially over the last few weeks. In fact, he had an injury in the middle of that. He got drilled in the ribs in mid-May. But before that, and then after that, he was equally good, which tells you a lot about how locked in he is for a guy that defensively is also an upgrade over who they have right now in Joey Wendell and John Birdie. I would be kind of surprised if they trade for a shortstop in the middle of the year, just because I think they'd rather see what this guy has. There's a reason why they traded one of their longest tenured players ever in Miguel Rojas, and it's to get somebody like Amaya that they feel like potentially could be their own internal solution there for a little while. The upside isn't particularly high. I don't think it's Tim Anderson batting title winning or contending high. It still would be better than what they have. So I would be kind of surprised if they go outside the organization this trade deadline at that position. Okay. With catcher, the complication with catcher, and the reason why you don't usually see big catcher trades during the year, it is pretty important to have a spring training period for catchers to learn their pitching staff. It is difficult to get caught up on that in the middle of the year and really work to your pitcher strengths. As a game caller, those reps, catching guys' bullpen sessions, having opportunities to just go through like your own exercises with them, where before you get into the real games, that's extremely important. So you can make a trade for a catcher in the middle of the year, but it's one that doesn't often yield like immediate results, at least defensively, because of the lack of familiarity. That's why you don't see a lot of those trades very often. As you touched on, there's just like not a whole lot of out there where guys are obviously available. Now, for the Marlins, the bar is so low because Jacob Stallings is
that helps.
Yeah, Jacob Stallings is about as bad as any catcher on any major league roster right now. There's no way to sugarcoat it. He like his usefulness is just not. There's no tangible thing that he's bringing to the table anymore. It's just the intangibles, which are worth something. They're not worth a lot. They're worth something. So they absolutely have to do something going outside the organization at that position sooner than later. The question is how big is that demand? Like, do they feel that Nick Fortes, as he is really starting to heat up lately and perform closer to what we saw last year? Like, could he potentially be your primary catcher for a decent team moving forward? Is there the need to acquire someone to go ahead of him on the depth chart? And so for me, I think the answer is yes, that they do need somebody. I think Fortes is kind of your really high quality, not like necessarily a backup, but the one who's number 2 on the catching depth chart and the one who occasionally fills in that DH and maybe has the athleticism to help at other positions when necessary. I do think they need to make a pretty big investment in catcher. Um, if they do plan to contend this season, the next few weeks, as we touched on, that's going to tell a lot because this is a very winnable stretch for them. You would expect them to have a winning record over the next 2.5, 3 weeks and put themselves in a position where if they do, they're going to still be in playoff position almost in the middle of the season. And once you do that with a GM in her final year of her contract, like you would think all the incentives are there for them to actually make a significant trade at catcher. It's just really difficult to identify guys that are going to be available that really move the needle. The one obvious one that they saw recently in Colorado was Elias Diaz, who's having an amazing year offensively, even though his track record is extremely mixed on that side of the ball.
Yes.
Defensively, though, there's no doubt that he is a catcher. And I think the floor on his offense is significantly higher than what they're getting from Stallings. Like he would be a pretty obvious improvement, and you think he's going to be available. The problem with the Rockies is that they don't always
Really
follow
know what they're going
predictable.
to do.
Their behavior doesn't always suit what you think a team in their position might do. So you have to wait and see in terms of whether they'll actively be trying to shop him in the middle of the year. And outside of that, a lot of these other quality catchers are on teams that are either in playoff position themselves or extremely close to being so. So, I mean, who is really going to be available that realistically available that makes a significant difference? I guess on a smaller scale, there's Yan Gomes of the Cubs. The Cubs got off to a really interesting start and have since faded quite a bit. But they're in a division that they're going to be able to stick around for quite a while. So I don't know if he's going to be available. If Yan Gomes is on the market, he has a team option after this year, and he's somebody that for most of his career has been relatively consistent as a hitter, especially compared to catchers. Like that's somebody that it wouldn't cost a whole lot to get him. It's just that he is relatively old at 35, turning 36 in July. There's a lot of risk of you don't know exactly when the wheels are going to come off at that position. It's kind of unusual that he's already made it this deep into his career and still is as productive as he is. There's a lot of the best catchers simply aren't going to be available because of the teams that they play on. And that makes you think that they'll have to wait until the offseason to really take a close look at it. And just circle back, they thought the Marlins felt that Stallings would be the answer. He would be the primary catcher for them for multiple years. And this is only the second year that he's been with the team. It's already just glaringly obvious that he's not the player that they thought they were getting. So they need to accept that reality and turn over every rock in search of an answer. I've been trying to hypothetically turn over the rocks for them, and I'm just not finding very much. But they have to try because what they have right now is just not sufficient.
Yeah, I know. I wondered about both Chicago backstops. Grandal as well. It's probably living in a bit of a fantasy land where the Marlins would eat that much money to make that worth the trade. So I think that would you can see if the Mets need a catcher. of something, then you can see that kind of organization just eating, because it's about, I think, 18 million that he's making, around there. But I thought that would be a good fit. But Diaz, that would be great for the Marlins if they can do that. But you did identify it with the Rockies. But we do seem to be in agreement, at least, that any kind of improvement is needed, because, like, as you identified, that that pitcher catcher relationship, their catcher has more intangibles attached to it than any other position. But I'm with Stallings at 150 now. Is he below 150? And it's just the batting. So I guess any improvement would be good, even if it's just someone batting 215, 220 who could split time with Fortes. That's they have to get more offense out of that position. So, but that is something that you do think they will do, regardless of special relationship or being Sandy's personal catcher or anything with that narrative. You think they are gonna go ahead and make that swap?
Yeah. Well, what's so special about the relationship now that we're a third of the way through
I
the
could have done air
season and
quotes.
it's not working out anymore? That was the only thing that Stallings that was what got him a pass for most of last year, is how well Sandy performed when he was throwing to him. All the digging I can find is that they obviously get along with one another and there's a friendship there, but he's not. Yeah, that's not going to save him. Like, that's at this point. That is, I think that we're long past any sort of that doesn't supersede everything else that's going wrong with him. It's just a question of what alternatives there are, because their internal options are not going to move the needle very much. And if among these few realistically available trade deadline options, if they aren't able to snag them, then you wait until the off season and have to reevaluate then. What's clear is that, like, Stallings is not part of the future. He's not going to be here beyond this year. So you shouldn't worry about hurt feelings. Just understanding that this is coming to an end one way or another, whether it comes to the end next month or the month after that, or you wait until the off season, that you're going to need at least one other catcher on your roster. I think we're relatively confident that Nick Fortes is a major leaguer in some capacity. You still need one more, and likely one more that's even better than Fortes is. That's going to require a pretty big investment in terms of either trade chips or in free agency. So they need to be prepared for that and start doing all the research to make a better selection than they did a couple of years ago. They thought they had the right guy in Stallings a couple of years ago, and they were wrong. So you need to evaluate what went wrong there, why it is that he wasn't able to simply maintain the performance that he had in Pittsburgh, and do better this time. Simple as that.
Yeah, definitely a massive hole they need to fix. Only other name, and I was looking it up there, that I found for this would be a very tiny rock, an incremental improvement, would be Carlos Perez of the A's. It's the only other name I found having a really good hot season this year. His overall major league career is completely uninspiring. I think he was out of baseball between 2018 and that's just the previous season. But yeah, I think he's batting 278 right now. That you would think that the A's would be happy to sell off anything for anything they can get. But that's not a long-term solution. That's providing a hot bat for the rest of the season. And yeah, hopefully they fill that. I remember being overjoyed, as you spoke to, when the Stallings trade went down. I thought they had made this bold step to fill a big problem, and it just hasn't worked out. But okay, we'll pivot to game time on here. But you just to wrap up with shortstop, you think that they'll stay in house? Think Amaya will be the move?
Yeah.
And use one of their other 6-7 middle infielders. The whole team is middle infielders.
Yeah, I think Amaya is coming up relatively soon, and so the question is, how exactly where does he fit in? Is it an injury that opens up the spot, or do they make a tough decision on a trade? Or, I mean, you just need to point to Joey Wendell as being one of the players that's been just very disappointing this year, any way you slice it. Another player they're very excited to acquire 2 years ago during the Stallings offseason. That was one that I was particularly high on, and he looked really good his first month or so as a Marlin in 2022. And ever since then, it's been a lot of time missed due to injuries and a lot of just very underwhelming performance offensively from him. And now it's been just especially bad this year for him. He's a pending free agent, so another player where it's not really any hurt feel. You don't have to worry about the hurt feelings if you feel that it's just not as good as the player was advertised to be, and you just need to recognize who they currently are. And if that's not good enough, then it's a sunk cost at this point. So there's no reason to um, there's an urgency, I should say, to like improve at these positions. And if you feel like you have an internal option that is an improvement at shortstop, they have one that very likely could be an improvement. That's a decision you make sooner rather than later.
Okay, well, I hope it happens. Definitely need the help there. All right, game time. Doing a little different this week. We've done various spin the wheel trivia iterations of this, but I wanted to come up with something that, with another nod again to the current state of the South Florida sports climate. Championship runs for our two number 8 seeds, the Miami Heat and the Florida Panthers. And in light of last night's victory, just trying to think of what's some of the biggest, in comparison, like some of the biggest wins in Marlins history were. And a bit of tricky exercise, making these lists. And obviously for like an organization like the Heat, it's a rich text of meaningful playoff games and consequential outcomes. While it would have been one of the worst losses, arguably, in South Florida sports history if they had lost the other night, attaching that to the Game 6 defeat, drop going up 3-0 and then losing 4 straight. After winning the game, I can't even tell you if a straight face it was the most important win against the Celtics in Heat history. But Marlins, much smaller sample size of wins to choose from. So we're going to put you all on the table, including series clinchers. And what I thought we'd do is just have you tell me what you think the 5 biggest games in Marlins history were. And I've written down what I think the 5 biggest games in Marlins history are, that kind of weigh with the significance of last night's win and pulling off that victory in the case of the Heat. And we're just going to see if we match. So this will just be a little fun with history on there and see if we pick the same 5. I'd be shocked if we didn't match on at least 4 of these. But still, just curious to see if you come up with anything different than what I did.
I'd have to imagine that cracking the top 5 is Game 7 of the 1997 World Series, walking off in extra innings against the then Cleveland Indians to win the first World Series in franchise history in front of a massive crowd in South Florida.
That made the list.
Yes, the 1997 World Series clincher is the first one that comes to mind.
I was there for that, so good. Yeah, good time. Chicken runs at midnight. Huge moment. That was what I had at number 1 on the list. So, okay, we're matching so far.
Yeah. Also in the top 5, definitely Game 5 of the 97 NLCS. That was the Livan Hernandez. Let me get the name of that umpire. Eric Gregg. So 15 strikeout, complete game for Livan Hernandez. Threw about 200 pitches in that one. And he wins it on yet another generous called strike call to get that final out against the Braves. That was a pretty big upset in that series. One of the bigger, you could argue, perhaps the biggest upset in Marlins playoff history is taking down the 101 win Braves. And that key performance from Livan in Game 5 has to be on there.
That was a huge moment. That was not on my top 5 list, but I guess I'm giving a little too much credit to Eric Gregg there. But certainly would have been in my top 10. That was just behind. I think I had that at 7.
Okay, well, another really safe guess: the 2003 World Series clincher, Game 6, Josh Beckett, a shutout of the Yankees in Yankee Stadium. Nothing else to say on that. Has to be on there.
And that was my number 6. That was wrong.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding this exercise.
Keeping it interesting. keeping interesting, but yeah, that's certainly one of the biggest moments in Marlins history for sure. They're picking up that second World Series win. Absolutely.
Uh, well, I mean, I can't say that this is in my top five, but maybe the very inaugural game of the franchise in 1993, uh, Charlie Huff starting it off, and the Marlins winning their first game ever in franchise history. Is that something that appeals to you and lives
Oh,
on in your heart
it
forever?
definitely appeals to me, and it does.
Yeah.
I remember listening to it on the radio. I've got Charlie Huff's autograph on the. But no, so the rest of mine. So to help you out a little bit, the rest of mine are playoff games.
Okay.
That I have on there. So that's yeah. So I'll. So what else would crack your list in terms of playoff competition?
The final game of the 2003 NLDS against the Giants, with the ending that being probably one of the more defense. I would have to say the most iconic Marlins defensive play ever. Jeff Conine to the plate, Pudge Rodriguez, the collision at home to Game 4, 2003 NLDS to clinch that series. That whole moment in particular, for sure.
On question, definitely made my list. Have that at 3 on there, and yeah. So these like drama, heart racing, excitement. Big moments, big wins, and I probably got a little cute not putting Game 6 of the 2003 World Series on there, but
Yeah.
Certainly the Conine play was on the list for me.
And then the less obvious one would be the Bartman game, Game 6 of the 2003 NLCS against the Cubs at Wrigley. There you have it. To me, that seems like that's more of a Cubs memory than it is a Marlins memory. although it was special for the Marlins, but ultimately what made the difference was the fact that they scored a bunch of runs in that inning. The door was open for them, and they just they unleashed a huge rally there to change it around. So I feel like that moment sticks out more in Cubs lore than it does in Marlins lore, but certainly top 5 worthy in my opinion, and now I know in your opinion.
Yes, I absolutely made the list. I'll admit I promise nothing personal against the Cubs on there, but I did honestly just kind of pile on, for that series, like where kind of that all seemed lost kind of sense. Maybe that was just maybe on my mind given the last 72 hours or so, and then coming taking victory from the jaws of defeat. So yeah, that Barkman game definitely was appearing lopsided like a loss, prior on the mound, and then it all went to hell for various shenanigans, having very little to do with that dude who stuck his hand out and got the ball. Point to 5 other reasons that are more important, but certainly as it lives on as department game, big moment. I also had Game 5 of the 2003
Sure.
at LCS. The Marlins down 3-1. Josh Beckett delivers one of the finest postseason performances in Marlins history, and secures the victory, keeping the Marlins alive in that series. And yeah, then I honestly just went with the Game 7 of the NLCS. That was what beat out Game 6 of the World Series.
Even though it doesn't compare to those, I'd like to shout out Game 2 of the 2020 Wild Card Series to see Sixto Sanchez pitching in that moment, barely a month after his major league debut, and to go 5 scoreless innings in that one. The Marlins as a whole shutting out the Cubs to clinch that in a series where even in a short series, they were significant underdogs to that Cubs team, that given how they had been a perennial playoff team, that was a very sweet memory. And afterwards celebrating with cigars at Wrigley Field, that was one of the more, I mean, the bar is very low, but that was clearly the high point of the Bruce Sherman era that we've had to this point. So we'll never see anything quite like that again, with no fans and with
no,
and with that entire, everything was very unusual, but that was as unusual as it was. That's a memory that will stick with me for a very long time, considering where we thought the franchise may have been going from that point forward. And now the reality hasn't been quite as sweet and the progress hasn't been as linear. that was a very satisfying. Yeah, that was very for a season that just a couple of months ago was coming completely undone due to COVID, and to go from that to go to winning a playoff series was something that was so
And
far and beyond what anybody could have imagined under those circumstances.
I'm sorry, but who did they beat in that playoff series again?
Once
Just to,
again, the Cubs.
yes, just to make it official, which fan base listening to this will hate me for at least a week. Yeah, another victory over the Chicago Cubs. All right. Well, and I had one other game, but I'm going to bring that up in a moment, actually, because it does connect to one of the people we're going to talk about next. So, in my continuing personal countdown of the Marlins all-time top 30 in their 30th anniversary season, going to unveil number 24 on this week's episode, and at number 24 on the list have Carl Pavano. 3 years with the Marlins, acquired for Cliff Floyd and many other pieces of the 2003 World Champions, including Garrett Hampson 1.0, Mike Mordecai, and maybe Garrett Hampson 0, Mike Mordecai 0.5. But in any case, Pavano led the 2003 team in innings pitched. So a pretty good run from here. Standout season in 2004. 18-8, 3-year ERA, got Cy Young votes, just like masterful ace level stuff, which meant that the Marlins could not afford him in free agency, and he moved on afterwards. It always surprises me going back that Pavano actually didn't start that much. I was mainly used out of the bullpen in the 2003 playoff run, but his 2 starts where he did get to take the mound at the start of the game was the Bartman game and the Alex Gonzalez home run game against the Yankees. So 2 of the more consequential games that stand out in the active memory in that series. Pavano played a huge part in keeping Miami in the game, and he was actually the pitcher of record in the Conine game. They actually got the win in that one. So while only making 2 starts that playoff series, he was definitely very present, man. That's why I have him here at number 24. Thoughts on, is that too high, too low? Thoughts on Carl Pavano's time with the Marlins?
That sounds about right. I think you have him in the right spot with Pavano here. In some ways, a little I think he's generally underrated by this team in hindsight, considering just some of his teammates that he had during his time, his fellow pitchers, where that overshadowed him, if not even for full seasons, then during the postseason, and as well, guys that just had slightly higher peaks than he had, even if it was for only a few starts at a time. But that very best season he had really was on a relatively short list of impressive Marlins seasons. In 2004, it was. So with him, I think this is exactly right. Stuck around a little bit post playing career as a Marlins broadcaster. That wasn't particularly memorable, but he was there. Just another connection to the team that he had. So I think you have it just about right here with Pavano at 24. I'm just concerned about whether you can get through this entire top 30 by the end of the season. I think if I do the math, the pace is featuring only one at a time at this point. I hope for your sake that you get through all 30 of those and give all of them the spotlight that they deserve as you continue this series.
Well, it's a challenge ahead of me. I will definitely have to double up at a couple
right
at a couple points, but I think I can get it in. I think there was maybe a week in spring training that I took off that might be setting me back, but I'll get there. And you can maybe you can help me across the finish line when we get to the last couple. But normally I'd ask you, this would be the part where I'd ask if you had anything to promote, but I think we've done that. So I'll issue a final reminder, marching orders for you to go and follow Eli and the rest of the Fish on First crew at Fish on First. You can find them on Twitter, on YouTube. Go to the web in progress webpage and check them out there. And my work, you can keep finding me at Call to the Pen. Follow me here on YouTube as well for Marlins After Dark. And we'll catch you next week. Go Marlins, go Heat, and go Panthers.